This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 464, Drupal Content Production. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. On today's show, we're going to talk about producing content with Drupal, how Drupal can help content producers, and ways it could be better, with guest Jerry Ta. We'll also cover Stage File Proxy as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Jerry Ta. He's been doing web production at Urban Institute for 17 years. He has worked on 20 to 30 sites during that time, mostly in Drupal, and also some different content management systems. We'll talk about that later and how that compares and contrasts. Jerry's also an avid Miami sports and Star Wars fan. I can understand the Star Wars, the Miami sports. Hey, listen, we all have to support our teams, right? Jerry, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Favorite Star Wars character, Jerry?
Oh, that's a tough one. I feel like I might take up this whole podcast.
All right.
We go down that rabbit hole.
Maybe we'll come
Obviously,
back to
it's
that
C3PO. C3PO, come on.
Oh, boy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are joining us for his fourth week. Thank you for that. Josh Miller, Director of Web Development at Urban Institute.
Hello, hello. Glad to be back.
And also, as per the usual, joining us, Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development.
Happy to be here. Happy to be joining for my vacation.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to work on code or configuration changes to your Drupal site in a non-production environment without having to copy over all the images and other content files? There's a module for that. It's called Stage File Proxy, and it was created in January of 2011 by Net Austin, but recent releases are by Stephen Musgrave, who listeners will probably recognize from the Needs Review initiative, among his many other Drupal contributions. In terms of versions available, there's 7.x-1.10, 3.0.0 Alpha 2, and 3.1.0, the last of which works with Drupal 10.3 and 11. It is actively maintained, has security coverage and test coverage, but in terms of documentation, there isn't a ton. That being said, the module has been the subject of numerous blog posts over the years, so there's probably going to be some online documentation to get you in the right direction. It has 15 open issues, 2 of which are bugs against the current branch, which is pretty great considering the module is in use by 16,710 sites according to Drupal.org. And once you have Stage File Proxy set up on your non-production site, when the environment gets a request for a content file it doesn't have, like an image, it will query the production site to create a local copy. It also has a mode where those requests are served 301 redirects to their location on the production server, so no files are ever copied. Once you have the module installed, you can set the origin website URL using the admin UI, using a drush variable set command, or you can add a line to your settings.php file. Also, if you have simple HTTP authentication set up on the site you want to pull from, for example, using the Shield module, you can add URL encoded versions of the username and password to the origin URL, and the module will still be able to copy down the files. Now, this module was previously covered in this podcast way back in episode 33, but I thought it was worth bringing back because it is so useful for working on sites locally or across non-production environments. Let's talk about Stage File Proxy.
So, show of hands, how many people on the call use this module? Yep. Okay,
do.
so that's 3 out of 5 listeners, 3 out of 5. For those of you that are using it, like a lot of times now I'm using DDev, used to use Lando, but it has like a pull function where you can pull database and files from your kind of remote development environment. Like, what's the benefit over that of using this module?
So I can jump in on that one.
Go for it.
if your customer site has, let's say, 3 gigabytes of PDFs, then doing that drush or ddev command to copy all of those down are really bringing down a bunch of files that you probably don't need locally.
Yep.
So it's the ability to sort of only have it pull down the actual ones that are needed to render out a particular page that you might be looking at.
And at least with urban sites, we have at least 5 of them that I can think of that are all over 20 gigabyte files folders. And that actually starts to eat up your hard drive space.
I also imagine from like a security or information security standpoint, right? Like, so truth be told, like I don't know that I would take that practice on a client site, right? I only really use that practice on my personal site, but I can see it being better for security to have something like this in place. And just to be clear, and I guess I may have missed this in your description, but is it copying the files down or is it just proxying out to the production environment?
It's a setting, so you can choose for it to either copy it down or to just do a redirect.
Okay,
the other thing is it works with the image preset functionality as well. So many times when you have an image on the page, you're not gonna have the actual file. It's just gonna be an image preset. It detects the preset, finds the original file, downloads that locally as well.
So
it'll also intervene because the Drupal site will try to like look for the original image, right? And it'll understands that and handles that.
Yep.
So what if you have a blog post on your production site and it is unpublished and you're using this on your local environment and it's proxying the images, right? Will it still be able to get to that image even though it's not published?
No.
Okay.
Oh.
I mean, it's only publicly available stuff.
Got it. Okay.
How you have your site set up. Like, I don't think unless you have it like in a private folder.
Actually, yeah, you're right, Josh. Sorry, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
If you upload a file, even if it's on an unpublished node or unpublished media entity, it's available publicly if you know what the URL is.
We'll grab it. Yeah, you're right.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It'll pull it down. Actually, and just to add to that, even if you have something in the private file system, it is still accessible too if you know the direct path, unless you have htaccess rules set up or you have it outside of your web document, web root. That's one of the reasons why Drupal core recommends that private files are outside of your web root, because otherwise it's accessible.
Interesting.
So yeah, you if you have files that truly need to be private, you need to make sure that they're
don't put them properly on the internet. Oh no, not the right answer. All right.
It's something that is somewhat related to content production too. Regarding this, it's sort of related. Dealing with files is actually really hard. And if you upload a PDF and then somebody gives you another PDF to upload, when you upload a second PDF, even if it's named the same thing, both PDFs are still live on your site. And there is a garbage collection system in Drupal that will eventually delete orphaned files, but it can sometimes take 6 months or more for that orphaned file to actually go away. And sometimes they never go away and it feels mysterious. And if there is a module out there that gives you more control over deleting files and uploading files.
So there is a module because I've had this problem. There is a module that you can enable that will allow for replacing files.
Oh my gosh.
So instead of
that would be great.
Instead of being like, oh, hey, I have the original version and version 0, you can click a checkbox and it'll just replace it.
Well, there's also a module that like gives you a new form element at the bottom for replacing, and you upload it, it will name the file, it'll replace the file. Like even I think I'm not the one that installed this, but a client installed it a couple weeks ago. I think even if the new file has a different name, Drupal will rename it to the existing file name and replace it. so that you don't have to do it. Also,
I can look. I'll look for that module and put it in the show notes because I don't recall what it was called. But yes, we had a client who would upload PDFs and then be like, "Oh, we got an update to this PDF, and the old version can't be accessible because we'll get in trouble." So yes, that functionality was very, very crucial. And like, here now you can just replace the PDFs immediately.
Yeah,
I'm laughing and smiling because Jerry and I talk about this all the time.
Yeah, it's a big pain point because we're constantly updating, like, especially if there's like a correction or something. So we have something, we need to make sure that it's not available.
Like, this will work 500% of the time. You're like, oh, that's not right. It's 50% of the time.
So I will say I love that this has turned into like a bonus module of the week. My quick Google foo has turned up 2 potential candidates here. So there is file replace, and there's another module called file field replace.
Yeah,
it's one of those. I'd have to look at the module page to tell you which one.
There's also media entity file replace, which is the one that my client is using.
Oh, okay. If you guys could put all 3 of those in the chat, I will look at them and then I will comment on which one we actually used. Because I think it was the file field replace, because that one adds a little checkbox that gives you the ability to replace the file or not replace the file.
Nice.
Of course, we're talking about files with the same name too. So if your file has a different name, then that's not going to work. But
I have a quick observation back to Stage File Proxy. If
thank
we're
you.
okay
Yes,
with going.
bring it back.
Since this is a developer module, and it's more likely turned on in local environments where module updates are usually turned off. I turn off module updates for me. I don't want to see the warning. I'd bet money that our usage stats are very inaccurate. Now, Drupal.org usage stats are just typically inaccurate, but since they're inaccurate across the board, I generally think it's a pretty good gauge of how popular something is. But I bet 16,000 is very, very low for this particular
I would
module.
Agree with that observation.
Well,
with no actual evidence, but
you could say 1 in 5 people aren't using the module.
There you go. Well, in our little collective
except here's the thing. Jerry is using the module. He just didn't know.
That's why it's only 1. That's why it's only 1 in 5 and not 2 in 5.
I would be surprised if your projects are not using it either.
Personally, I don't think we are, but that's just my 2 cents.
Possible.
All right. Well, Martin, as usual, you have provided a rousing module of the week, and there was even some bonus content in there. If folks wanted to suggest or recommend a module of the week, how could they go about doing that?
Thanks, Sean. We're always happy to get nominations for module of the week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as ManClue on all of the Drupal and social channels.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks, everyone.
This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. Let's talk about life after Drupal 7 end of life. Since August 2023, there has been a lot of discussion around Drupal 7's official end of life in January 2025. It's no secret that many companies, organizations, and individuals are still on Drupal 7 and have yet to migrate. I think we can all agree that migration, while beneficial, is not always feasible. This is where Hero Devs comes in. Hero Devs has partnered with core team maintainers of Drupal 7 to build and maintain their Drupal 7 never-ending support product, ensuring the same quality of support you have come to expect over the years. Drupal 7 never-ending support, or NES, allows for an effortless transition, allowing your site to remain secure, compliant, and compatible after Drupal 7 goes end of life. This allows you to migrate on your own timeline, or potentially not at all. Hero Devs promises to keep Drupal 7 alive and well, even offering support for the current top 100 Drupal 7 modules. If you'd like to know more about Drupal 7 never-ending support, visit herodevs.com. That's HERODEVS.com. Now, on to our primary topic. All right. So, Josh, we're talking about Drupal content production today, but I'm hoping that before we get started, you can kind of give us a short overview of how Urban Institute uses Drupal to produce their content.
We this is kind of a throwback to the first time I was on Talking Drupal. We're just talking about Urban Institute and how we use Drupal, and it's a long, complicated. I don't know, long and complicated is maybe not the right way to phrase it. We've as an institute, as an organization, we've used open source software for a number of years. Jerry might actually be able to tell us how long, but the clear reason we're using Drupal is because it is open source, it's supported by communities, and it opens up a world of agencies who already know and understand our software. So we have a lot more control over going between different agencies or hiring people on that have experience with this software. It just opens up a lot of doors. And it allows us to contribute back to software that is impacting the world in very tangible, evidence-based ways, which is very important to us. So Drupal in general, that's the why we use it. The how is it's really straightforward. We basically have roughly 22 sites right now that are running Drupal that are hosted on Pantheon, and we have a host of people who log into those sites and update them regularly. And the specifics of any particular site do change. Some sites get updated, maybe a couple times a week. Some sites get updated a couple times a day. But generally, every major content producing thing that gets published at urban.org or on Urban's Institute's websites is being run on Drupal. Now, we actually have, I don't know, I think the first count that I did 4 years ago was roughly 300. We have between 300 and 400 sites that have individual URLs, but we only have 20 of those running content management systems, and they're all Drupal. So that's really how we use it. We have an internal staff of 3 developers at the moment that develop Drupal sites, and we have a list of agencies that we work with for different specific reasons that we sign multi-year contracts with.
So is it all Drupal as far as like a site, right? Like, is Drupal powering the whole thing, or are you guys integrating with like third-party services to bring in data or send out data and stuff like that?
Over the years, we've had content models that where content was produced on a separate Drupal site and then brought in via feeds to other Drupal sites. And I think most large organizations will kind of see. I think the word that I've seen a lot is this federated way of having content, and federated search gets its name from that concept. And federated search is where you can search multiple sites from one place, and we have that. We've had that in the past. Currently, everything is kind of its own Drupal site at the moment, and that may be changing soon. But at the moment, everything is Drupal.
Federated content is one of those things that sounds a lot easier in theory than it tends to be in practice. But when you have it working well, it does make content editors' lives a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, it's also another term I've heard is content syndication, right? So you're syndicating content out, and there are services that can help you do that. I recently have been talking to Content Sync about that, and so I know everybody's kind of got their thing, but if you want to keep it in Drupal, feeds is a great way to do it, especially if you can unify that content type. So works out.
So Jerry, I don't think we've had too many people on the show with the job title of content producer. We've had a couple of editors on before. We've had a couple of people that create content, but can you tell us and let our listeners know what are the day-to-day responsibilities of a content producer, and what would you say that job entails?
Yeah, so I kind of came up with a title for content producer. In my sense is I call myself a super user, in the sense that I don't have development like I don't have development access, but I have Josh gives me as close as I can get where I can do stuff that a normal editor couldn't do. On the day-to-day stuff, mainly it's we have publications like probably like I would say anywhere from 10 to 20 publications that get posted a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. And then on top
Mhm.
of that, we have features, like they can vary from their stories that we tell or data tools. So that's also part of the process of like building those pages out. And then also something called we call project pages, which is just kind of uh, a way for researchers to have a specific section of the site where they can kind of uh, create their pages for a project, like whatever project they're working on.
So are you a is it content producer as in like you produce the content yourself, or is it more like a video or a TV show producer where you're just making sure you're helping make sure everything is in place so that people writing the content can get it up there. You're making sure that images are being generated. Like, are you actually writing the content yourself, or are you just helping the people that are writing the content make sure everything works together and gets published on the site the day it's supposed to be published, or both?
Yeah, yeah. So we have I work on the communications department. So we have the writers, and then we have the visual people, and we have like media outreach and stakeholders and all that stuff. So my job is to, when everything is done, that they give it all to me, and then I get it on the web and make sure it
Okay.
looks like, because we have styles and things
Yep.
like that. So and like brand and stuff. So my job is to kind of make it look clean on the site.
I love the
Okay.
description of like a TV producer because I actually
Yeah.
feel like, Jerry, that's a lot of what you do. You're wrangling a lot of people that don't really know all the details of what it takes to get their idea, their project, their funder to get that onto a particular website. And sometimes uh, Jerry's put in this position. I've seen him do it. I've seen him do it 100 times, where someone's going to him with, "I need X," and what they really need is Y. You know, like maybe they want a website, like a full website, and what they really need is something entirely different, like a PDF or something.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, Jerry, if that's part of kind of your production duties, but also like how do you manage a schedule with that much going on? That is it. Do you have other people handling that as well?
Yeah, I have to shout out all our project managers because they make my life easier, and they're the ones that are wrangling. They're the ones that making sure the researchers are doing their job, the writers and the editors and everything. So most of the time, I get it in a nicely, cleanly wrapped package that I can just put on the web. But there are some times where we get curveballs thrown at us or something changes. So then that's kind of where I can step in and help in terms of what we can do on the web to like meet those needs and make sure that we can get the product out in a way that's like very accessible to people.
And I guess, and this might be for both of you, but how often, Jerry, do you have to go to Josh to be like, hey, I have this particular page site request that's going to require a custom data visualization or something, or a custom feature or a special call out? Like, how often and how do you negotiate those types of things? Like, how often do you have to go back to Josh and be like, hey, A, is this possible? B, do we have the budget? C, how long is it going to take you to implement this for stakeholder XYZ? Like, is that a day-to-day thing? Is that a couple times a year?
Thankfully, it's not a day-to-day thing, or me and Josh would probably not be on talking terms. But no, it does happen, and for me, my first step is like, can I do something myself? Like, can I do this in like HTML or like kind of hack it a little bit to get it done? And if it's like a one-off thing where I feel like I can do it, then I try not to bother Josh. But I feel like if it is something that may be useful, like something that we can keep using, and or something urgent that I'm blocked and I can't do it, then I'll definitely reach out to Josh, and he's always great about like giving these like answers that I didn't think of, even in terms of like what I could do myself. Like he'll just like give me guidance in terms of what I could do that way, and then but there's some stuff where it's useful to like, hey, we could use this later on and let's build it out. So he's always very like encouraged in that way.
And Nick,
Josh,
you actually described a bunch of job roles that exist already, and there's people. We have the product manager who handles a lot of that, like budgeting concept and making sure everything's right sized for what we're trying to do. And we have an entire data visualization team that that product manager might tap as a resource.
Okay.
And that data visualization team then produces that data visualization, which we actually do quite a bit. We do it enough that we've made it faster. And that data visualization team would then give Jerry the content he needs. He kind of treats data visualizations more like an asset that you can add.
Okay, makes sense.
I have so many questions. Getting into more of the nuts and bolts of Drupal and like how you interact with it, right? I'm wondering, are you guys using Layout Builder or Paragraphs to build your pages? And if you're using both, do you have an opinion on one versus the other?
So our very first Drupal site was Paragraphs, and I think was it Drupal 9 or 10, Josh, that we started using Layout Builder? Probably 10, right?
It started out as Drupal 8. Urban.org
okay.
right now started out as Drupal 8. It took us 3 years to rebuild and transition from Drupal 7. So by the time we were able to launch Urban.org, it was Drupal 9, and it's now living on the end of life 10.
Yeah, so I do like Paragraphs in the sense that like when I'm in edit, I can just put all the content in there, and then if I did everything right, and I save it, and then it just magically appears. But I do like Layout Builders of flexibility in terms of like sections, like adding sections, moving stuff around, like, and just there's a lot of like just the modules that or the blocks that we have available is just like there's just a huge library there. So I in the best of two worlds, it would be some sort of combination, but I definitely feel like Layout Builder meets our needs a little bit more than Paragraphs nowadays.
Yeah, and I imagine it's probably gonna get a big boost from Experience Builder as part of Starshot going forward. I'm wondering though, and forgive me if I missed this, but are you guys using some sort of component-based design system to work with Layout Builder? Like, are all the sites using like a set of kind of like building blocks components with Layout Builder?
I'm happy to take this, Jerry.
Thank you.
We have a design system. It's called Linden.
Okay.
It was originally developed by Phase 2 about 5 years ago. It's since taken on a life of its own, and the whole idea is, we use atomic design to build out web components, and then all of our sites, most of our sites, I would say it's like 70% at this point of our sites are using Linden. And those Linden components have a Drupal side of things. So the Linden components live in their own repository, and they're actually, I wasn't prepared, so I'm blanking on exactly what the Linden. We use Stencil.js, which just basically generates web components. But we have that, which is JavaScript based, and then we have a Linden theme that has a bunch of connector bits to make sure that everything is rendered correctly in web components. And then we have Urban Blocks, the module, which just basically defines a block for every, I'm trying to remember if it's a molecule or it's certainly not for every atom, but we essentially have blocks that you can then put into Layout Builder.
Yeah, ties it back to the design system, basically.
Right. And
Yeah.
you can have fieldable blocks, and that's the way we use it is we have
Yep.
fieldable blocks. So the fields are connected to attributes. And then when we render the block, it's actually pretty easy to add a component like that. One thing I wish we could do is WYSIWYG should be able to add custom blocks like that, just like Layout Builder. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, that's on my wish list. You can we might have actually talked about this on the episode we had you on to talk about Urban specifically, but CK Editor needs to know how to render those, so you kind of have to have a custom plugin for each one. But it's been on my list now for about a year. At some point I'll figure it out. You can put not custom blocks, but you can put custom components into CK Editor and they will work, but you have to define the attributes and they won't render in the CK Editor side. They just render on the output side.
How important is that, Jerry? For because I mean, I feel like that's the difference between Layout Builder and Paragraphs, right? Is you can see the way it renders. Like if you add an author block, you can actually see the author's picture and name rendering on the page when you're editing, versus this says this is an author block and this is the author that's connected. Does that matter to you?
Most of the time it doesn't, because we're just entering content in. Like if it's a field that you just are pulling pages and stuff like that, I trust that it works as normal. But we do have like some stuff that does need a little more customization where I have to go back and forth. Like and some of our blocks we have like padding on the top and bottom, so it's like kind of going back and forth, seeing if the padding's working the way it is, like how it looks and stuff. So.
Well, there's two of. We'll move on after this because this isn't a show solve all of Urban Institute's.
Please, I would love it. I would love it.
But there's two things that actually might help you, because I had a similar thing with another client recently. One is integrating. There's a module, and we'll put it in the show notes. There's a module that lets you integrate tokens with CK Editor, and it's pretty easy to create custom tokens. So if you have something like an author block, and it's a defined entity, you can pretty easily just have a token. You like click the token browser, you click where you want it, you click the button, and the token will be entered, and then you can render that however you want. It takes a little bit more work, but you can also do something similar with shortcodes. So they're WordPress.
I was going to say that sounds like WordPress shortcodes is what that sounds.
Well, the token is more. It's like a Drupal. It's actually a Drupal token, so you can use them elsewhere.
Nice.
But the shortcode one is like the WordPress one, and you can define additional attributes for those shortcodes. So if you have something like an author block, but you needed to define the ID in line or something, you can do that.
We used to use media embed to great success. Similar to that, yeah.
Yep, similar to that. Okay, so anyway, getting back on track, Jerry. You mentioned, we mentioned in your bio that you've been doing this content production job for Urban for 17 years, which is quite a long time. Could you kind of go back in time and talk about what your experience has been over that period with web editing tools? Because nowadays, I imagine it's a lot easier and a lot more flexible to enter content. But I'm curious, in the beginning, what was it like to enter content on the web?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I'm like, if I had to do what I did back then now, I would quit my job, because it would have been so tedious, like the manual content and manually entering content and just like every link, and it would have drove me crazy. But yeah, so our first site was running something called CommonSpot. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's based
Never
off
heard
of
that.
It's based off of Code Fusion. And it did its job. I mean, it definitely, because I used to update sites with HTML, so it was a huge upgrade from just manually updating sites from HTML to CommonSpot. And
okay,
what did you use to edit the HTML, Jerry? Sorry to interrupt, but
Dreamweaver.
That's what I thought. It all comes back to Dreamweaver.
Yep, exactly.
Man, I'm having total flashbacks right now to like building sites in Dreamweaver, and like Cold Fusion is. Whew. All right, keep going, Jerry.
Yeah, so I'll just say Cold Fusion, and I think everyone feels each other's pain when I say that. But Yeah, we got into Drupal in 2012 or 13. So it was a huge jump in terms of like being stuck in a proprietary content management system to an open source one where you just have like a vast amount of like resources available to you, like people building modules and tools that are there that you don't have to customly build yourself or try to find out how to do it in the CommonSpot and things like that. So that was a huge change. And then I think one of the things that really was attractive to me was like how much the community contributes to Drupal. So there's like updates regularly, like new modules coming out, like work, like even if like just putting out stuff, like if you're stuck on something, like the community is there to like just offer any suggestions or help or anything like that. So I think it was like going from like when I first started, it was like me and a developer, and we would just try to figure things out, to having like an army behind you in terms of like, just me and Josh, and we have our web dev team, but then you do have resources behind that. So it's definitely made my job, and just Drupal is very dynamic. So like things are pulling in, and it's nice that it's done that, and it's also created a lot of good problems in the sense, because we're doing more stuff now. Like our workload has increased because like it's pulling in more stuff, but then we're also free to think about what we can do next to improve the site and things like that.
I imagine it also makes you look like a bit of a rock star in some cases, because I imagine that you probably get requests that are like, I need a page added to the website, and here's the text, and this is all in like an email, and oh, can you add this image of these like people doing this thing? And you're just like, okay, and then you kind of put it into a page and show them, and they go, wow, that looks great, thanks. And you're like, oh, cool, well, I'm glad I could brighten up your day.
The real magic happens with the rabbit hole module, because Jerry has total access to the rabbit hole module, so he can set different redirects from different types of content. So taxonomy terms or nodes can take you somewhere else. And I can't count the number of times that I was like, this to solve this problem's like 3 days and a custom module, and no one has time to do it. And Jerry responds with, or we could use the rabbit hole module. And it's just
That's funny.
Yeah, but there is magic that happens like that.
Yeah, no, that's always, it's always good when you can use the built-in. Well, not, I say built-in, it's contrib, but I consider that built-in. When there's a built-in tool ready-made that you can kind of repurpose, that's always great. Jerry, there's one other part to this question. So how long have you been working with Drupal?
So I think my first being exposed to it was when we were ready to move off of CommonSpot. We started looking at content management systems. So we had like meetings with different companies, like some were proprietary, and then we had some like Drupal shops come in and show us Drupal. And then I think my jaw dropped when I saw Layout Builder for the first time, and it was just like, you could just move this here, or you can just create this block and put it there. And I was like, this is amazing. Like it was, yeah. So I think it was around 2012 that when we were starting to look at content management systems, where that was my first exposure to Drupal.
Interesting. So I'm wondering, and this is actually probably more of a question for Josh, I think, like you're a supporter, right, of an internal content product team, right? And I'm sure like as the kind of like technical question answer guy, right? There are issues that crop up that you'd like to address. I'm wondering like, what kind of issues do you see? And then like, how do you kind of prioritize them?
It's an interesting point, especially the way you phrased it. And I think I try very hard to make a stable and consistent environment. And when that stable and consistent environment is no longer stable, or consistent, it can trip up a lot of people. And then I'm technical support, as you pointed out, or my team is technical support. And this happens a lot when you get fancy with something and you start to support lots of different relationships, and people start to get this idea of an expectation of what they can do, which sounds like a lot of very like how do you even understand this? And that's actually our problem, is content models are complicated and our tools are complicated, and when they collide together they can create complex, challenging understanding. And how do we solve that? How do we solve for something that is either a very technical solution or a very very content solution? And what I mean by that is, if you have this type of content, like some sort of user guide on how to manage internships, and that's, you know, you're getting funded to help with internships across a variety of industries, and the funder wants to make sure that authors are getting credit for the research that they've done on these particular pages, and our content model doesn't support author relationships on those kinds of pages, because those kinds of pages are some sort of separate mini site that has lots of little features added to it, but it doesn't have the author's piece. And that's the problem. That's the work that we're involved in. And how do I distill that down into, like, what would the community prioritize? And honestly, stability, in that whatever features we have are consistent and straightforward. So entity references is, I think, a really good example of something that really helped with the content modeling problem. And when we solidified, I say we because I'm part of the community as well, when we solidified on the contributed module that I believe Commerce Guys created for Drupal Commerce, around the entity reference field, making that something that was core, and making sure that that relationship worked and consistently worked, and you don't really have to question it anymore. That made my life easier, and it made our content production people's teams easier as well, because now they don't have to understand why relationships work. They just know that they connect an author,
right,
and it works.
Question. So in your answer, it kind of dawned on me a little bit that maybe the folks not so much producing the content, but creating the content, or making the ask for the content, right, don't necessarily have good insight into kind of the design system and the components that are available. Is
Right.
that a fair statement?
I would say so. And generally I call them stakeholders, people that have a stake in what gets produced, right?
Okay.
And the stakeholders, it's not their job to fully understand, like, our design system. And sometimes our stakeholders are internal because it's an internal project. Sometimes they're external because it's externally funded, and the research is getting done, and as part of that research it needs to be published. And you get lots of different varieties of stakeholders too, and which is very similar to like an agency model where you have a paying client. But it's like, if your paying client was actually working through paying somebody else, like an expert in something that isn't content modeling, and that expert is the one who's trying to get you to make the website.
So Jerry, is your job like basically like interfacing with those people and explaining what is possible, or is it basically collecting all of the requirements and going, well, the system doesn't do this, Josh, we need the system to do this? Like, is that like I guess the question is, like, how much of those two scenarios are you dealing with? Or is it like, hey, it's like a 50-50 split and I'm just kind of like moving things along?
I would say it's like probably like 75% of me like trying to take what they have and trying to use what we already built into the system
Yeah.
to try to use. And
Okay.
then if it's really good, like if it's something that's a good suggestion, then I'll talk with Josh. Or if
Right.
there's something like problematic, I'll talk with Josh.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
there isn't like a governance layer there to say like, hey, stakeholder, here are your set of rules, like follow them. And like that's kind of what the magic Jerry brings to the table here is like he says, hey, this is what it does. We're there set, we got 75%. And then how often, I guess, is there that 25% where you guys have to add a feature or update functionality? Is it fairly often?
Sometimes I have to convince Jerry that he's in that 25% range, right? Like he's like,
Then I appreciate Jerry because
goes-
like, you know,
he goes quiet for a few days. I'm like, hey, Jerry, is everything okay? Or his coworker Lydia, I'll say the same thing, and she's like, yeah, I've been working through this like massive spreadsheet where I'm creating pages for every row, and it's like, I feel like we could build a tool where you upload that and it creates the pages for you. Like, let's work on that, and it's hard sometimes for the people using the tool to imagine this tool evolving quickly.
Yeah. And
interesting.
I imagine one of the big issues that you deal with, I'm seeing two big issues, or I'm hearing two big issues that you deal with, Josh. I'm appreciating more the amount of work that you probably have to do. One is, it sounds like a lot of the external stakeholders that you have are people funding good work too, right? So you want to accommodate them. Like sometimes you have a client of a client that's asking for something, is like like they're asking you to sell them something. Like, we don't sell stuff, like we provide this service. Like, why are you trying to get us to sell you hardware? Like, that's not what we do. But in your case, like, you're trying to support people that are doing good work in the first place.
Yeah, they're
But
asking for things like how do I make sure that our data around making sure someone is economically upward mobile, which is a fancy way of saying somebody who lives in poverty can find ways to improve their circumstances economically. How do I make that research pop a little bit more, or how do we
yeah,
even how do we connect it with this other research? And it's like, we agree that this is an important thing and we want to get behind you on this because this is important. It's very hard to like separate the heart from the budget and
yeah,
the timeline, for sure.
yeah. And then the other side that I'm hearing, and this is true of any long running project with complex content models and complex requirements. It's not restricted to Drupal, but I think Drupal lends itself more to these types of situations. But like maintaining the content model, like you said, for example, adding authorship to certain subsites or something, like there's a layer of like remembering which subsite has gotten the authorship relationship, which one hasn't, how many components, like how often do you retire components versus add new components, right?
Yeah,
Remembering
yeah.
where they're integrated, whether they're using layout builder paragraphs, like you start to like the maintenance side of it again, especially when you have a mission, you're always trying to expand, and kind of going back and doing the maintenance side or the documentation side, that can be really difficult to achieve as well.
And we
um
do use scheduled transitions, which is a module that lets you not only schedule a publication, like when it goes live, but you can also schedule when it gets unpublished. You can schedule a transition between any state of content, which is one of the many super useful like utility modules we use for reasons like you just said. That this thing that we've produced has an expiration date, essentially.
Hmm.
oh
Doesn't
so it's
happen
like
often.
scheduler, but it integrates with moderation.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So you can tell it to transition from published to archived if you
Okay.
want to. And you can do it years in advance if you need to. Something we're working on with
Very
our
cool.
data catalog actually is we publish data in datacatalog.urban.org, and we now have the capability of telling that data to just go away after 10 years. And we don't have to remember it. It'll just go away.
Which I
That's very
understand.
presumptuous of you guys, but hey, I like the positivity.
Yeah, I'm of two minds of that. Like, yes, I understand why that has to happen. Like you don't want out of date stuff, but then again, it's also like that's
what
so
it
much
comes down
data
to.
that's just going away.
Right? Like, why would
It's
we get
sad.
rid of it? Yeah.
But I
It's okay.
understand.
It's okay, guys. If it doesn't bring you joy, then you should get rid of it.
Data hoarding is real. We go up
It is.
against, I think it's Pantheon is 25 gigabytes for a performance site. Their files, we're always at that limit. Like, what can we get rid of? And I think part of it is because we're not using that expiration or that replace PDF upload.
I
Yeah.
believe it.
So Jerry, we've had a couple of shows recently about DrupalCons, and the Drupal community is great. It does tend to be fairly developer heavy. I'm curious if you've gone to DrupalCon. What do you look for as a non-developer? What kind of tracks do you look for? What kind of talks or BOFs do you look for when you're going to a DrupalCon?
Yeah, so my first DrupalCon was 2016, the New Orleans one.
Okay.
And then I just felt completely out of place because I was like, we had just started using Drupal, and like I was very new to the whole community aspect. So, and I kind of went by myself, which was probably a big no-no, like for someone that's new. So I just was like overwhelmed by everything that was happening. But then like we went as the a web dev team last year to Pittsburgh. And it was just a very different experience where like just knowing people to go with, and then them connecting you with others, and it was a much more like enriching experience for me. And when I go now, I look for anything that can would make my life easier in terms of like how, like I think one of them was about like how this hospital manages like 20, 30 different centers, and that's kind of like the same situation I'm in. So just understanding how they did it, what they used, and then also when they have specific like talks on modules or things like that, that's something where I can at least be like, hey Josh, I want this, like, and kind of nudge him. So yeah, so not too much into the coding, but anything else I'm pretty like anything that will kind of improve my production at work. So
I also feel like if you're wearing that Dolphins hat in either of those cities, you're probably catching a little bit of grief. But
definitely won't wear it to Boston.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as a Patriots fan. You know, the Saints and the Steelers are they're very passionate about their football down that way.
The next DrupalCon's in Atlanta. Is there a team there that would have a problem with Dolphins or Patriots?
Definitely Patriots, because the Patriots put a whooping on them in a Super Bowl not too long ago. So
there you go.
That's a interesting story. If you're not familiar with it, look it up. So Jerry, I don't know that we've fulfilled our promise in talking about kind of what could be better about Drupal. So I'm wondering, from your standpoint, doing the work that you do, what do you think like the hardest part of using Drupal is?
I think it's kind of touching upon what Josh said, with sometimes I'm that 25% where I'm just like, it's easy for me to just manually put the content in. Like, even though it does take time and it's monotonous, like there's just so many possibilities with Drupal that I can't even imagine or think of. And I'm just used to being like, I'll just put these 25 publications straight in. Like that's just easier for me rather than ask Josh to do it. And then based on his workload, like it'll be done in like 3 weeks or something.
Drupal appreciates you taking the question and saying that, you know, it's a Jerry problem. But I mean, that's not necessarily a hard part about using Drupal, right? It's like it's a mindset. And don't get me wrong. I think everybody that's built a Drupal site has had the mindset of like, I can get this to work just the way it is. I don't have to add a module or do development, or like I can get it to work. I just have to keep trying. So I understand that, but I'm wondering, like, I don't know if there, let me reword the question then, right? If there was a feature, right, of Drupal that you could have that would kind of like just make things easier, whether it's like once a week, once a month, every day, whatever, what do you think it would be? And dear listener, I've given Jerry absolutely no time to prepare for this question because I just added it. So
I feel like this kind of touches, I think, on our next question. So like, I would like more control on the back end, but like without breaking the site. So I
okay.
think like Starshot is like kind of what I'm looking for as a solution, where I can kind of go in there and do stuff that Drupal makes it easier for me to do some of the back end stuff, where I don't have to tie up my web developers' time in doing it. Like I can just jump in there and just get it done, and then
so better like CSS editing, like style editing, or things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, there's like little things that I feel like if I knew the back end better, I could just jump in there real quick and tweak it, versus like having to have a meeting with Josh and try to figure out how we can do this.
What's really weird, I think, is we have a website that gets deployed, but it takes like a couple of days, sometimes a week, before a change that we make to the website ever makes it live, because we have a quality control process, all this other things.
Sure.
And it makes it slow for something that Jerry needs to be published tomorrow to be added today. And so what often ends up happening is, if it's really required and it needs some sort of functionality, is JavaScript gets written and thrown into a WYSIWYG, or a field where it will render, and we move on with our lives, and then we have a broken page.
Will
Robinson. No, absolutely. But it's weird because we're at this intersection of content as deployment, and where our deploy model just could never cope with that, because it's 100,000 pieces of content.
So there isn't a possibility to say like, hey, I'm going to edit this configuration or this template for this one site and then roll that change back into the repo for the next deployment.
Yeah, we can, and sometimes do that. Like we'll
but
try to
nobody loves that approach. Nobody's like, oh boy, can we please?
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those, it's really hard. I think it's something that WordPress, there's like a line that Drupal doesn't cross, and WordPress has crossed many times over.
Yeah.
Where they let you edit CSS in the browser and stuff like that. And I think the Experience Builder and a lot of the Starshot stuff is probably closer to that line. And that I think would actually help us.
And I think one of the real key pieces of Experience Builder is that the plan is that everything that is done in the front end, like it's funny to me. It's funny to me hearing Jerry talk about this piece, because he calls this back end, but as back end developers, we consider this front end. It's like, it depends on where you are in the stream. But I think one of the key pieces of Experience Builder has made me a little less nervous is that anything that changes there, as of right now, is meant to be able to be kind of exported back to code somehow, so they can be cleaned up or modified. Like, you're not going to deal with a situation where you have to worry about overwriting something that Jerry did, or Jerry overwriting something that Josh implements.
I mean, maybe that feels to me like you are correct, and that is the goal. But it also feels like there's going to have to be a CI/CD process change there to support that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the community, I'm aware of this, and I'm sure the people talking about it are aware of this, because I think they're much more intimately involved. That's a big goal. I'm sure there'll be compromise too somewhere. But anyway, I'm going to change this next question a tad bit, Jerry, because I think have you heard of Experience Builder? And
I have
are you
not.
excited about? Okay, so Experience Builder is part of Starshot, which is what the original question is going to be. Experience Builder, I think, is meant to be the next generation of layout builder.
Okay.
as a developer, I've been more focused on Starshot than Experience Builder. But we do have a whole episode where we talk about Experience Builder. I think it's meant to be what you're asking about. You know, the ability for you to like maybe say, hey, I need to tweak this color or something, or I need to build this block, or I need to. I mean, I don't think we have a full scope of what it's going to be yet. Um, but since we're putting you on the spot, I guess I'll do it again. Now that you know about Experience Builder, what would it take for you to kind of volunteer there? Because Experience Builder has some of the most talented developers in Drupal working on it. Um, but I'm sure that they would love to have a voice of a content producer talking about what is valuable to them, what works for them, what doesn't. Is that something that you would volunteer for or work on? Or maybe Urban would sponsor some of your time per week or per month to, I'm not sure how Urban works with these types of things, but is this something you'd be interested in getting involved with?
Yes. Just give me the sign up and I'll sign up right now if it's ready. No, I would definitely love to be able to share how I use it on a day-to-day basis and just being able to see the progress and things like that. I would definitely be interested in volunteering and, trying to like offer my insights so that future content producers, it'll kind of spare them the pains that I've gone through the last like 17 years of production work.
Okay.
Oh, Jerry, I'm sure they're looking for testers. Well, maybe they're not at that point yet, but I'm sure
Yeah.
they'll be looking for testers soon. So,
Oh,
And
yeah,
having
definitely.
somebody who uses Drupal but doesn't write Drupal,
Yeah.
doesn't like create
Yeah.
code,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you're kind of a rare bird.
Yeah. And there's to be clear, there's a lot of people interacting with Drupal like you are, Jerry,
Mhm.
but there's not a whole lot of people like you that are in the issue queue or on Drupal Slack like you interacting. And so your perspective would be invaluable. And I'll say this right now. We'll put this stuff in the show notes, but there's an Experience Builder issue queue. There's also an Experience Builder Slack channel on the Drupal Slack. Those are probably the best ways to like find out where to plug in, to be
Okay.
honest. But just for our listeners, there's also Starshot project and Starshot issue
so,
channel as well.
so
If
if
you're
you
interested in that.
like Jerry are an invaluable content producer, you can help test and kick the tires and offer suggestions and all that fun stuff. I'm going to double down on Nick's question about Starshot and Experience Builder. And Josh, can ask you to pull out your big crystal ball and tell me in 5 years, what does content production look like in Drupal?
It's a good question. In that we get to dream, right? 5 years is a long time in web, in Drupal world, even, because what would we be on? It's Drupal 11 right now, so we would be in Drupal 13. Do we even do 13? Do we skip it? Do we do Drupal 14 at that point?
These are all valid questions.
It is. So let's assume we're on Drupal 14. What does Drupal 14 look like for content production? I think this is actually the biggest unknown, honestly, is does Drupal stay a front-end technology? And right now, it feels like Drupal will stay a front-end technology. That's from my perspective as somebody who uses web components, who uses, not fully decoupled, but has stuck his toe in the decoupled pool, and there's different types of vehicles on the road for a reason, and I feel like Drupal can be kind of like a chameleon in that too, and it is today. But like the biggest challenges ahead for Drupal for content production, I think, comes down to templating. And this is my big idea. I don't know if it's actually a real thing. There's probably a module that does something like this, but Layout Builder or its next version, Experience Builder, is going to have the same problem that Layout Builder had unless we solve it. And we're going to have to start solving it now while we're constructing it, which is we have let me describe this as talking about an Urban Institute content type that we have on urban.org. We have a publication content type. There are 12 different publication types. And when you have a different type, maybe it's a blog post, maybe it's a research paper, maybe it's Jerry, help me out. There's other kinds of a feature. Each one of these have different layouts.
Mhm.
And we need Experience Builder to handle layouts in a templated way and in a way that we can update in the future that is either field-based or isn't exactly tied to the content type. So that we can produce content in a consistent environment and have the output of that, whether it's Drupal or some sort of decoupled front end, handle the templating of that with enough capability that if we override it or something to that effect for a one-off, we're overriding like the templated one-off. And having the structure around managing those templates for those variations of one single content type, that's where, at least for Urban Institute, that's where we need to be in 5 years. We need to have a singular kind of process that can live in different ways in different places consistently. Again, it's the consistency that kills us every time.
I'm going to be the big jerky face and say, doesn't Layout Builder already kind of do that?
It does, but per content type. You can only template per content type.
So you need it to span multiple content? Oh,
right.
So your publication is not a single content type. It's multiple.
If we did, we'd have 14 different content types, which is untenable as well. So we have different types of publications. And if you're a feature, you have like a full bleed image. And a clamped piece of text.
I understand now. So you want,
if you're a block, it's totally different.
Yeah. So when you choose the type of content, you want to restrict that layout based on a field. Like you create a publication, you have a drop down that says, what type of publication is this? And that's what you want to tie the layout to. So
yes,
it sounds like you need something like paragraphs
like
layout.
Yes.
You need paragraphs layout.
I don't know if that exists. I'm not a paragraphs guy.
Paragraphs layout. Yeah.
So just spitballing here though, but like once you select that content type, why don't you have the layouts in Layout Builder?
No, it's one content type with multiple layouts.
Well, I understand, but like you can select the different layouts that you use in Layout Builder. Like you can pull them out of the sidebar. So like
the problem is the real problem that we keep running into is we have a layout that we've extended by like making blocks understand what field values there are, and then they hide and show based on that. So like a clear example is, let's say we have a full bleed image. That full bleed image is part of our Layout Builder template. And it only shows up if the publication type is, I think, feature, right? So but the image field or the file field that we upload that image to gets used all over the site for all these different publication types. It just only shows up as a full bleed in a particular location. Well, blocks inside Layout Builder just don't really understand that. You have to extend it in kind of a hacky way. And there's all of these other, like, that's a really complicated way to deal with it. But we already have this concept of templates for Layout Builder. The idea of being able to choose one and then being able to update it in the future. That's the real key. Is let's say 2 years down the line, our blog needs to have a different layout, and modifying the layout template block conditions just got complicated, because now we're going to probably have to have a field that says what version.
So you can do it. You can do it if you don't deviate from the original template, but once you deviate, it's all over. That link is broken, right?
Then exactly. So you can't update that template in the future, and you end up with the same thing you had back when you were working with Dreamweaver, which is a bunch of content that you can't change.
Yep. Yeah, and so paragraphs layout solves a piece of that puzzle, but I think in your case, it's not really tenable to. Like
especially because they need Layout Builder layout.
Exactly.
It gets complicated.
It's complex.
That's 5 years problem though.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the, I think the piece that you highlighted that I think Experience Builder, we'll close it after this because we're a couple minutes over, but I think the piece that you're highlighting is Layout Builder content doesn't really have a good concept of what type of layout it's in or section that it's in. And sometimes you want that, excuse me, sometimes you want that information so you can make decisions based on it.
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking about is less layouts and more section selection. But anyway, well, this
it's a hard problem. Sorry, John.
Totally. No, you do not have to be sorry. It is your show, and it is a hard problem to solve. Now you have my wheels turning, and I'm going to think about this for the rest of the day. So there is that. Jerry, thank you for joining us. It's really been awesome speaking with somebody who's using Drupal in the way that you are.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
And you can get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. You can sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing that Become a Patron button in the sidebar. Alrighty, so we've reached the end of our show, and this is where we let people know where we can contact one another. So, Jerry, if somebody wanted to reach out to you to start to get involved in Starshot, how could they go about doing that? Or in general, just to talk about content production?
That's a good question. How about my Twitter account, Jerry Ta, Jerryta?
There you go. All right, Josh, what about you?
It's also fine to say I don't like being contacted. That's fair enough. I'm on Twitter or X. I still haven't gotten used to saying that. Mr. Josh Miller.
Nobody has. It's okay.
Nobody has. Yeah. And on all the Drupal things, Drupal Slack, Drupal.org, just Josh Miller.
Fabulous. And Josh, thank you again for joining us for the last 4 weeks. As always, feel free to reach out if you have a topic you want to talk about. We'd love to have you back.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Nick Laughlin, what about you?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
If you enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. And I just want to say here at the very end that it's been a massive boon for me. It's been so exciting to talk to you guys and the Drupal community for the last 4 weeks. And I really appreciate you having this format where you bring on guest hosts. That's such a cool format. And I hope it continues for as long as it can, because you're opening up this conversation to a lot of different perspectives. And I want to praise you guys for that a little bit, because it's not just your thoughts, right? You're not the thought leaders. You're more like the thought wranglers, right? Like you're trying to bring in different perspectives and get them to like bounce around and talk about it. And I just think that's really neat and something that I'm very proud to have been part of. So thanks again, guys, for bringing me on and being a part of this.